en route as a result of calls about what was happening on the bridge already, and then they arrive, as we saw in that footage, probably about a minute or two after that has happened. Now, that's very telling that if this was happening somewhere else, would that be possible? And if not, what would the outcome have been? There needs to be a very careful debrief of this. There's so much footage, there's so much information around that this will be a huge learning opportunity. And I hope that politicians watch this and think, what if? Because there are not sufficient firearms officers elsewhere in the country for this sort of response.
We have some very sad news to impart. Information now coming to me from a Sky source that one of the police officers involved in this incident has succumbed to his injuries, has died. We understand that up to 3 officers were attacked outside Parliament as this man struggled to get into Westminster. Those 3 officers suffered varying degrees of injuries, but the information that we're getting now as we reintroduce Kay Burley here is that one of those police officers has died as a result of the stab injuries he received.
Mark, for people just tuning our way, I know that you were talking about this earlier and telling us that 3 officers had been injured originally. The reports were that 1 officer had been injured, and from what you're telling us now, Sky sources saying one of those officers has died.
Initially, we had thought, Kay, that 1 officer had been stabbed. Obviously, in the early instance or the early stages of any unfolding incident like this, details can be confused and eyewitnesses have differing accounts. And the official information that we had, certainly from a source, was that 1 officer had been injured, had been stabbed in a confrontation with the attacker. It subsequently has come our way from a source that multiple officers were injured, possibly up to 3, and we believe may have been stab injuries as well. 1 of those officers has succumbed to their injuries. We are expecting a statement, Kay, from Mark Rowley, the Assistant Commissioner at the Metropolitan Police, the most senior counter-terrorism officer in the UK. He may confirm that, but at this stage they might just not have that kind of information that they want to put out. Their first priority always, and understandably, is dealing with the unfolding incident. Although this particular incident in terms of attackers, we believe, is at the very least contained and may well be over in terms of there not being any other attackers, what they don't know is if there may be other attacks that are in the planning that may unfold in the coming hours. We have seen with other terrorist incidents around the globe that other terrorist attacks have taken place at multiple locations. So not just 1, but multiple locations have been attacked, usually within a short period of each other and in quite a close geographical area. So that will be front and centre of the thinking of investigators as they urgently try to establish who this individual is. The fact is, clearly they've got him in custody now, which is very important. At the moment, we believe he is still alive. He was brought a short time ago to St Thomas's Hospital at a major trauma unit just on the other side of the River Thames. And he was guarded by a number of armed officers. We showed the still image of this man lying on the stretcher, having been lifted onto that stretcher. He was on the cobblestones earlier, surrounded by armed officers pointing their weapons at him as they tried to make the area safe. He was being worked on by paramedics. He is now at St Thomas's Hospital. We haven't heard otherwise, so the assumption is this man is still alive. And Kay, you can see on the water there, on the right-hand side of the screen, this is one of the rigid inflatables that the CTF SFOs, counter-terrorism specialist firearms officers, use to get to locations very quickly on the River Thames. We know, of course, that this unfolded right by the Thames, and we know that at least 1 of the injured here fell into the river or was tossed into the river by the impact of being struck by that vehicle, and that person has been recovered from the water. Some reports that that person is still alive. So an unfolding incident contained for the moment, but a very wide-ranging investigation to determine whether this man acted alone or with others.
OK, just hearing that there will be another police briefing in just a few minutes' time is what we're being told. Mark, I'm sure you're aware of that. We're also hearing that Theresa May has spoken to Donald Trump on the telephone. She'll be chairing a Cobra meeting very shortly, and we'll get input from that as and when that meeting has finished. We're hearing also that New York police have been told to tighten security around UK locations. As far as the number that have perished, Mark, you have previously told us that at least 2 people have died. Do we know whether those numbers had included the police officer, or is that number increasing all the time? Difficult to say at this stage.
Yeah, I think we need to be a little bit cautious there, Kay. You might be right. The 2 people who were reported to us as being fatally wounded in this attack may well include the police officer, and we've only just found out that a police officer has succumbed to his injuries. So it may be in that tally, but certainly about 45 minutes or so ago, a source confirmed to me that the number of dead had risen from 1, that woman who was struck by a vehicle on Westminster Bridge, to 2, and we didn't know whether that fatality at the time was one of the civilians around there or whether it may have been a police officer. Clearly a devastating attack in terms of the many tourists who flock into central London and crowd onto Westminster Bridge and the streets all around Parliament, but a devastating attack too for the police, who really have to put themselves front and centre of any of these incidents. They are trained now to push forward because they know that the motivation in these terrorist attacks is no longer to go and to try and take hostages, to hold them for any length of time, to make some kind of statement that might come to a peaceful conclusion. These days it's all about trying to really make as many or inflict as many deaths and injuries on people as they can, to try and make that kind of a statement. So police push forward to try and confront any attacker. And the information that we have in terms of some of those officers, indeed it may be all of those officers who were injured, is that they would have been unarmed officers. You know, of course, that guarding the gates of Westminster is a mixture of armed, of course, that guarding the gates of Westminster.
Okay, and Mark, as we hear from Sean Spicer, who is the press secretary, of course, and many people will know him for Donald Trump, saying we condemn today's attack, we applaud the quick response from the British police. The City of London has the full support of the US government. We have looked at images of this man lying on the ground. I wonder if you could describe them for us again to us, Mark, if you would please, as we wait for the police to update us with further information. We can see a knife that has been kicked away from this man on the ground as he is being urgently attended to by others.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 similar images that are out there at the moment. We have one of those images where you can see that the man is now on a stretcher. He's about to be loaded into the back of that ambulance, being worked on by police and by paramedics there. And just behind one of the men there, the man you can see in the white shirt with the blue gloves and the blue trousers, just behind him is what looks to be one of these large kitchen knives. And in another of the images that I saw, Kay, one of the armed officers was standing on that knife just to make sure that the attacker could not get to the knife. He was standing on the knife. He was pointing his weapon down at the alleged attacker as people were tending to him medically on the ground. A very dramatic incident that was unfolding there. And of course, just nearby, just feet away, but you can't see it in that shot, was another police officer who was being worked on by other passers-by. We understand that the MP Tobias Ellwood, who lost his brother in the Bali attack all those years back, was there and was giving first aid to that badly injured police officer. The information.
Mark, let me interrupt you. if I may, just for a second, because we are looking at some images here from our position about 100 metres or so from the Palace of Westminster. This is the House of Lords that we can see, and we can see a group of school children, quite young school children, that are being escorted from the building. I just need to move a little bit further away and then you can see a little bit clearer. School children are invited. Jason Farrell with me. School children are shown around on a regular basis, aren't they? But they would have been caught up in this and they would have been involved in the lockdown.
Yeah, quite terrifying for them, really, these school children. It's quite common for them to be shown around Westminster, especially on the day of Prime Minister's questions. We often see them in the building on that day, and they look like primary children, so they were young, I would say under the age of 10, although there's perhaps an older bunch coming out now. And yeah, they would have been a part of that tour, and that tour does involve the yard where this attack happened. It involves Westminster Hall, close to the yard. So, it's quite possible that some of them might have witnessed some of the horrors that were going on within Parliament when that happened. And it looks like they've been kept in there now for quite a number of hours and are just being released now here onto the green on the west side of the building,
so
and coming out onto Millbank
joining
Road.
us. I mean, these are dozens of little ones. Obviously, we don't want them heading up this way. We'll be careful not to identify these youngsters, so we'll probably just show their legs or some such. But they're starting to stream out of the building now. They're being escorted by the police. One can only start to imagine how these youngsters must have felt when this incident unfolded. They would have been aware. Do you want to have a look? But again, please don't identify these children as we're looking at these images. They would have been anxious. They would have been unsure. I'm just going to bob down, and then I'm not in the way of our colleagues who are also showing the pictures at the same time. So they're just pausing for a second now, these youngsters. We'll be careful not to identify them, obviously. Can we pan down just to show their legs rather than to show their faces? They're going to come behind us here. There are medics here who are just going to have a chat with these children and make sure that they're okay, feeling okay, slightly anxious about what has happened to them, not sure what these youngsters have witnessed today, but it is a terrorist incident right in the centre of London, and these youngsters were caught up in that. There were shots fired as well, of course, Jason, during that. And I'm looking at these kids. They are,
I would say, between sort of ages of 7 and 11, perhaps, we're talking about. Quite common for them to be shown around the House of Lords, the House of Commons. These guided tours happen all the time. It's a great experience for them, but today it would have been quite different. It would have been frightening. They would have been kept inside the building, like the MPs, moved from one place to another, kept within a cordon that was created around the people in the building by the police as they tried to go through the building to make sure that it was secure. And I would say we've just seen about over 100.
Yeah. I'm just looking at their little faces, actually.
100.
Some of them are holding hands. They've been buddied up, so they're 2 by 2. They're holding hands with their buddies. Some of them look pretty shocked, pretty confused about what's happened. 1 or 2 of them a little bit tearful. I'm going to say they're probably aged between about 8 and 12, something like that. And now we're seeing another group of youngsters. Again, we'll keep it wide so we can't identify these kids, who are, again, looking a little bit stunned by what's happened. Hardly surprising.
Yeah, they've had a long afternoon, haven't they? They've been in there wondering what's going on. And no doubt the police, who are very well trained in dealing with this, will have looked after them well. There's a fair number of teachers with them as well. And this has been a probably rather longer than expected visit to Parliament. Shall I just give you the statement from the Mayor of London whilst we're here, because it's just dropped on Twitter. He says there's been a serious incident near to Parliament this afternoon being treated as a terrorist attack. I've spoken to the Acting Commissioner. The Met Police Service is dealing with the incident and have an urgent investigation underway. My thoughts are with those affected and their families. I would like to express my thanks to the police and the emergency services who work so hard to keep us safe and show tremendous bravery in exceptionally difficult circumstances. Of course, we now know that one of those police officers officers appears to have been killed in this attack.
I'm not sure whether it's the Speaker or the Deputy Speaker, but they have informed MPs that would have been trapped inside the chamber that sadly an officer has died as a result of his injuries, and Sky sources saying at least one other person has also died as a result of this terrorist incident here in central London this afternoon. As I think we can get up again now, Jason, as those youngsters have just made their way through. We did our very best to make sure that we didn't identify those youngsters, but they are just to the right of where we're standing now. They're waiting, I'm guessing, for their parents to come along and collect. They all had their high-vis jackets on. Some of them a lot more shocked than others. They were right at the heart of this developing story this afternoon. As you were saying, hundreds of them come, particularly on a Wednesday when it's Prime Minister's Questions.
Another small group of them just coming out now, and it's quite, as I say, it's quite common. You're always walking around on Prime Minister Day of Prime Minister's Questions. They also often go in on a Friday as well when it's a bit clearer to have a look around. And as you say, some quite stunned faces there. Some of them seem to be getting over it, laughing and joking with their friends, but some of them still looking quite stunned by whatever it is that they experienced this afternoon on what is normally a very exciting tour. And I have friends and family who've done it and have really, really enjoyed it. But I mean, this would have been quite different for these children today, just looking at them there. They do look a little bit stunned by what's happened.
Yeah, they do look, some of them, as you say, quite stunned and shocked by what's happened, hardly surprising, really. We are waiting for another police briefing. We've had one already from Scotland Yard. They didn't confirm injuries. They said several people had been injured. They certainly didn't confirm fatalities to us, but that we are expecting another police briefing within the next few moments. In the meantime, we can look again perhaps at that image of we believe to be the attacker who had managed to get inside Old Palace Yard.
Yeah.
Now that is just for people who are just tuning our way, and people are doing that all the time. It's near Big Ben.
Yeah.
It's down towards the bottom end
on the
where
corner.
Westminster Bridge is, but it is within the confines of the Palace of Westminster. How on earth did they get inside there?
They will have come round that corner, and as you turn the corner off the bridge, the gate is right there. It's always got police officers on it. Mark was saying that these police officers who were attacked outside the gate were unarmed. And again, that's quite common. They're normally there to, keep the peace, keep people away from the gates, just manage the in and out. There will be armed officers around, and there's always armed officers inside. And it seems as if there was a very quick response once the intruder got into the grounds. One of the things I noticed about the photograph is that he has a pad on his chest, on the lower and upper part of his chest.
CPR.
And that's CPR. So it looks as if they've had to try to resuscitate him in some way after he has been shot. There's no need to put a CPR on someone unless they've stopped breathing, their heart stopped working. So that's the kind of thing that must have happened by the looks of him, because they've ripped the clothes open on his chest and put those two pads on.
The terrorism minister was involved with that, you were telling
Well,
us.
the terrorism minister, Tobias Ellwood, was involved in trying to keep a police officer alive. That's what we understand. He actually gave CPR to one of the police officers. We don't know if it's the one who eventually was killed, but